Sorry about that. Wow. Okay, well, here we go. We're going to start over. We're going to start over because we didn't have the microphone on. And we want to see that there, yes, there it is. Okay, good. All right. Well, hey, folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. A special welcome to those of you who are tuning in live. It's so good to feel you. And a thank you to Integral Life for providing the portal for me to go live. And yeah, good to be here. So I'd like to start today with a letter I received from one of my listeners a couple days ago, Kathy, who praised me for my humility because I agree with her that I am one of the most humblest people you're ever going to meet. Haha. It actually gets to an integral lesson here, so hang in here. Let me just read her letter. It's all of 3 sentences. She says, "You have a big effect on me. I think it is because you are humble, not trying to pretend to have it all together. I love that quality of openness, Kathy." And then I wrote back, "What a great compliment, Kathy. And I like to think that what you describe is a quality of integral. Having it together is the booby prize. At integral, one begins to trust and surrender to the beautiful but not pretty process of evolution. In first person, your own world, second person, relationships with others, and third person, relationship with the manifest world, arising civilization. And it's such a relief from having to grip around an ideology and defend it, or to have to grip around a self and defend that. Puke. As you can tell, Kathy, you have inspired me. Maybe I'll talk about it on an episode." So that's what I want to do here. And to just go back to Kathy's letter, there's a lot that she says in those 3 sentences. And I want to make a couple points. One is, first of all, it's nice to see integral, because I do think she's talking about, basically integral Jeff, who's the guy I present on this podcast. But, there's also postmodern Jeff and modern Jeff and traditional Jeff and others as well, earlier stages as well. And they all grip around an identity and an ideology, and they're often at war with each other. But in a way, the very definition of integral consciousness is the ability to see that and get okay with that, and to get curious about that, and to welcome these people in. And, all these different colors of Jeff, welcome them in and love them in a way. And that when you do that, or you get, into the practice of doing that, that's integral. That's what you're doing there. So as I wrote, as I thought about it, there's a couple things. One is that it's nice that integral is being, so again, it's nice that integral is being described as humble, because normally integral is seen as being arrogant. And I have a podcast called "Is Integral Arrogant?" back a year or so ago, where I talk about that. Because we do, after all, claim that integral consciousness is a higher stage of consciousness than most people are at. And fortunately, and I always love how Ken put it, it is an elitism, and it is, I guess, by definition, but it's an elitism to which all are invited. And I always love that from Ken Wilber. So anyway, so yes, so there's, when I think about these, I talk about the postmodern Jeff, traditional Jeff, modern Jeff, all of these guys. I really saw it last weekend when Chuck and I decided to do a road trip, because we didn't want to get in an airplane and we didn't want to go far. But we drove up to Mount Rushmore, about 5-6 hours away. And we, saw this amazing monument of the 4 presidents' heads on this mountain. And I could see my various selves respond to it. My traditional Jeff, and did not expect this, my sort of God bless America Jeff, literally choked up. I mean, I had to wipe a tear away. It was so impressive and had such this feeling of Americana and what I had learned and this amazing history of this amazing country that I'm a part of and I'm a citizen of and proud of. And so there was him. And then there was modern Jeff, who was like, how the fuck did they do that? I mean, so I got all into how they did that and the models they used and how they worked with geometry and how pneumatic drills were a new thing. And in a way that really, the technology, the third person, the lower right quadrant moves the ball. And so they were able to do it and just got all up and interested in that. And then there was postmodern Jeff. And postmodern Jeff was really enthralled by my one friend who just grew up there, and that's who we met, and talked about how it was the history of it. He actually worked there when he was younger in the tourist area, and that this was literally built as a tourist attraction to bring money and tourists into this area, and that it defiled a Native American sacred mountain. And you could see that, this mountain could not be sacred to people with pre-modern minds. They don't know anything about erosion or history, that the world just is there, it's just arising, and so are they, and they're in the middle of it. And it's all for them, and everything is meaningful. And that's that sort of, you talk about traditional dress, this gets down into magical Jeff, or magical to the degree that I can, and as a practice, I like to do this, is to look at nature with a pre-modern mind. And then it becomes sacred. And that's magical Jeff, or the earlier Jeff, tribal Jeff. So anyway, and then the story goes on that this mountain of Mount Rushmore is part of this geological thing of these needles, they call them, of granite that just arise out of the ground. And then there's this part of the world you could drive to, it's a couple miles away, where these needles are just everywhere. And they are, I mean, it's hard to have a modern mind when you're in the middle of this. This is just dripping with sacredness, And the original idea was to carve those into the heroes of the West. So General Custer and Wild Bill Hickok and Annie Oakley. And thank God. I mean, the modern mind came in, the modern people who really wanted the tourists and everything. They wanted a national monument. So the presidents, so everybody in the country would come, not just, the local so-called heroes. And, that of course gets into the whole postmodern sympathy for the Native Americans and and this is maybe more an integral insight, is just how vulnerable indigenous people are to modern people, especially modern people with pre-modern morality, but modern weaponry, modern bulldozers, modern whatever, everything you got at modernity. And, and they'll come in and do what they do. And so that's what happened. And so anyway, all of those Jeffs are online, but that is, at an integral perspective, fun, I guess. I mean, it's the new game you're playing, because to be one of those or the other, or have them fight with each other, or which one is right, is impossible. It's boring for sure, but it's not even possible. You just don't want to do that anymore. And so it's nice to let them all be. We don't have to decide which is more important. And so that's this evolution in first person. And it does have a quality of humility to it, because you don't know what's right in the way that you used to anymore. And you trust the bigger system of evolution. And it's, very much not pretty aspects, but the fruit of evolution, which is ever unfolding stages of goodness, truth, and beauty. And that is just what happens as we get things that didn't exist before. Something arises out of nothing, more arises out of less. And to think that you could predict that, and think that you need to actually make it happen and be what you think and have the future be what you think it should be, is a little bit like asking a 9-year-old what they want to be when they grow up. And she says, I'm going to be a doctor. And maybe her mother and father say, yeah, she's got all the qualities, she's going to be a doctor. And that's, great. And it can be a guiding principle, but is she going to be a doctor? Highly unlikely, maybe. But that's the point, is that at Integral, we relax into the system more. We have more faith than we have confidence in the accuracy of what we think is going to happen. So anyway, let's see here. So that's the nature of creativity. Yes, I talked about that. That's good. Yeah, so actually I'll go into this next part. I talk about having a warrior Jeff and a magical Jeff, and these earlier stages, an archaic Jeff, the Jeff who is aware without a lot of discursive thought. Let me just lay them out real quick. Like archaic Jeff, the first Jeff, that's that just coming into consciousness. Tribal Jeff is magical, deep communion, connectedness to loved ones, this liquid space between our tribe, this loyalty, demonization of the other often, you again, that love and fight thing going on. And then there's the warrior Jeff who just wants to have my way, just do it my way. So anyway, there's a cartoon that I saw in the New Yorker that I loved, and it was just, I think the cartoon editor of the New York Times might be reading some Ken Wilber or Steve McIntosh books, but he is, or she is, really, a lot of the cartoons have an evolutionary quality. So here's what I'm going to share. And I know some of you are listening, so I'll describe it too, but let me just share it here. And what that means is I go to there, and I go to this, and I go to this. So it should be showing up. And it's a cartoon, and it shows an old caveman with his staff. And he and another caveman have come upon a couple of cave people sitting in front of a fire. And the old man looks at them and says to his companion, "Back in my day, we froze to death, but we were happy." I think that's hysterical. Back in my day, we froze to death, but we were happy. We don't need your dumb fire. So, so yeah, that's such a beautiful, it gets to this quality that we have as human beings where, unless we had a terrible time or terrible luck, we very much love the world we emerge out of, and the country and the milieu and the weather and our mother's face and all of that good stuff. And that is the standard by which we judge the rest of this fallen world, and we just continue to get more sophisticated and developed and more further away from that magic, and always look back at what it used to be. And of course, this cartoon also just beautifully delineates the distinction between the first two stages of development as we slice and dice them in Integral. And that is the distinction between indigenous, which is just you're getting by as best you can in nature, and you don't live long, and you live in caves until fire. And this is third person. This is the technology. That's how technology moves us along. Fire's the first big technology that human beings discovered or tamed, put to their use. And then that gives us the ability to settle down more because we can control the environment, and we develop more complexity, and we move into the tribal stage. And that is a good definition. And actually, we get a couple integral insights from this. And that is that part of what is at work in terms of the basic philosophy of people on the left and people on the right, and we're going to describe them developmentally as people on the left more postmodern, and people on the right more traditional, and modernists are in the middle. Half of them kind of go postmodern. They may be the more academic, scientific, and the other half, the business people, tend to go with the traditional. And there's your culture war. And that both of those originate in how we see and the story we tell about humans' state of nature, the early stages of development. And I got to say, I've been reading a couple books that have caused me to rethink some of what I used to think about the earlier stages. And I'll get to those in a second, but the two poles of the stories that we tell is that, it can be, and often is described as the difference between Rousseau and Hobbes, the two philosophers. Rousseau had an idea of the state of nature being a egalitarian bliss. And Hobbes famously said that it was nasty, brutish, and short life in prehistory. And whichever one of those rings more true to you will tend to place you in the polarity that we still have, which is that people on the left tend to naturally fear development. They naturally fear modernity, corporatism, and people on the right tend to fear the Leviathan or the government. And we have natural antibodies to that. If you watch MSNBC, or just talk to your liberal friends, the stories that make sense to them are the ones that demonize the corporations, or don't even demonize them. Just look at the downsides. There are plenty of modern corporate structure. The people, your conservative friends, will have a natural antipathy to the government. And God knows there's plenty of reasons to fear the government. And that's the great thing about Integral, is we get to fear both. And, that is, it's part nurture. It's part what we hear, what we learned in school, what we learned from our parents. But a lot of it is also just our karma in nature. What malfeasance, corporate or government, matters most to us. And we experience this world that, we're in when we make these distinctions. We experience these as the revealed truth. And so anyway, the couple books that I wanted to mention is, one of them is called Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. And I think he's Dutch. And he has first of all, I wanted to love the book. I merely liked it, but I liked it a lot for this part. And that is that he is friendly to humankind. It's not a condemnation of human malfeasance and foibles and stupidity. And, you can certainly tell that story of humanity. But this is a hopeful history. That's the subtitle. And he did a couple things for me. One is that he paints a picture of humanity. It's not particularly developmental. In fact, it's not developmental, and that's why I didn't love the book, because it would have been made so much more sense if it had been. But what he does do that I appreciated is that he talks about us as a species. So think of us as humanity as not really a particularly developing species, just what are the basic qualities of humanity that we can discern. And one of them is that we are nice to each other and we are friendly. And he calls it being homo puppy. And just this sort of, we're the friendliest species on the planet. And that's really the secret to our success. And so he goes up against one of my favorite books, one of my favorite authors, Steven Pinker, Better Angels of Our Nature. And Steven Pinker shows decisively in terms of forensic anthropology, that is the study of how the people whose skeletons these are, how they died. And that people died from violence far more in prehistory and, just less to this day, even including the horrors of World War II. That more people died of violence in earlier stages, and this has been, and not just violence, but life is getting better by almost all measures. And I think that's true and observable in many ways. But what Bregman says is that 90% of the violence is done by 10% of the people. And that has been a proportion that has held true through history. And he uses examples of, it turns out there's sort of a hidden story of military history that most of the soldiers don't really fight. I mean, most of the guns were not fired. And that only about 10% of the soldiers did 90% of the damage. And that there are violent people. Again, it's the smaller percentage, but most people aren't. Most people, the bayonets aren't used. They're not bloody. They actually shy away from the actual combat. And again, there's not really an integral story in the sense that, with that said, there's still an ever wider circle of compassion that has developed, a circle of moral consideration that is bigger now than it's ever been, moving beyond tribal to world-centric. But he does make a case that maybe part of why that forensic evidence is there that Pinker talks about is because, it's sort of an exaggerated version of the 80-20 principle. It's the 90-10 principle. So that's one thing. And the other book that I read recently is called Breathe. And it's The New Science of a Lost Art. That's the subhead. And he talks about how human beings, and this is again using anthropological skeletal evidence, had good jaws and teeth until about 300 years ago. And I mean, he makes the case that agriculture was a mistake because this is when we got, food that was easy to eat. And, we weren't just out there chewing on the raw roots and berries and meat and so forth. And that before that we were. So, it's hard as a developmentalist to say that agriculture was a mistake because it seems inevitable. And, 6-year-olds grow into 10-year-olds, grow into 12-year-olds, and it's always kind of horrifying, but it's always kind of great. Um, but of course, in an integral structure, which we're moving towards, we can make this new distinction that, okay, we do need to have a reliable supply of food, and we see this happening, but the highly processed food is not healthy for us. I mean, we know that at any rate, but that actually, life wasn't as nasty, brutish, and short as we used to think in terms of our health. That, yeah, maybe you died by 35, but you had good teeth and jaws till then, and much better than people at a similar age do now. So I like that. All right. Okay, I wanted to also show you something. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to hold that till next week because I'm going to actually try to have them live on the show. But you'll have to wait and see. All right, I think that'll do for now. What else is going on? Trump is going on, of course. It's the never-ending Trump show. And, you think about even this, the violence going on in these cities, and Trump's going to Kenosha and so forth. That happened yesterday. And so on MSNBC, I hear the argument that he is provoking violence. And on Fox, I see the argument that he is working for peace and the police and law and order. And I can see that, and this is another way that Integral really helps us to just notice the worlds that we live in and how we think that they're the only world there is, and how our identities are gripped around these ideologies or the other way around. But that there's a dynamic among traditionalists, and of course the traditional side of the street is going to be Fox News, where you don't worry about provoking somebody. I mean, you don't be crazy about provoking somebody, but life is a struggle between good and evil. And you don't have to provoke the devil. The devil is at work. I mean, this is the big picture. I mean, this is really the world. And so the idea of Trump provoking violence doesn't even compute. You don't worry about that. Your enemy is clear, and your enemy is out to get you, and you see that in foreign policy. You see that in all kinds of ways. That bottom line is you're just going to have to fight this. This is set up. You were here to fight this force, and so that's how that world sees it. And liberals think their argument about he's provoking it makes perfect sense at the liberal side of the street, because we have actually a higher level of development. We see more going on, and we see how people are provoked, and we don't have that idea anymore that the world is a colossal titanic battle between good and evil. We see shades of gray, and we see how people become who they are, and how different influences can bring forth different responses. And so that's that world. the world of the liberal progressive. And it's it's just an insight in how these two worlds tell the story, and poor modernists in the middle are just trying to keep the trains running on time. Thank God. All righty. Well, enough of that. Again, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Oh, did I say this? I wanted to say this, that I get letters from people saying, how can I find the episode where you talked about XYZ? Because I did it on the live show, but then I never posted it. So sometimes that happens. And another reason to tune in live. But I just wanted to explain that. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to explain is that if you listen to this on podcast, Daily Evolver, you will want to check your Apple Podcast app, because for some reason or other, the link broke a couple months ago, it turns out. And you have to delete the Daily Evolver and then resubscribe in order to have it come back up to date. So if you're having that problem, that's what's happening. And that's the solution: to delete Daily Evolver and resubscribe. All right. Okay. Thanks, folks. Have a great day. And it's always fun to meet you here on the Daily Evolver.